stop trying to automate processes before you've actually worked them out manually, right? Take the time to do it in a spreadsheet, to do it in a Word doc, like set up the regular cadence, right? Meet weekly, bi-weekly, whatever that looks like, talk through the thing, track it, figure out if this is something that actually needs to be automated. Is it worth the investment? If so, then evaluate appropriately and then go forward with it. Don't just buy stuff for the sake of buying stuff. And I guess like in 2021, 2022, that message was probably a little bit more important because now it's being forced on most people by their finance teams. But you'll make your life a lot easier if you're trying to go get an investment, whether it's in technology or additional headcount or whatever that thing might be, by taking the time to get at least a subset of data, do some experimentation, and then say, hey, based off of this, I believe this could happen. Is that worth the $10,000, $20,000 in spend that I'm asking for, right? And then do that incrementally.
Do you have a recommendation of what people should start doing with regards to RevOps or their CRM?
Yeah, write things down. A lot of companies have really good people working there that want to be successful, that want to do the things that they're being asked to do well, but they're not given a concrete path forward. And the people who sort of like hold the keys to those gates haven't taken the time to necessarily memorialize processes, concepts, ICP, persona, things like that into paper. So take the time to do that.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell, CEO and co-founder of Dynamico,
and Amy Weaver, Dynamico's marketing director.
On this episode, Cliff Simon, Chief Revenue Officer at Carabiner Group, shares how they provide RevOps-as-a-Service to their customers.
We typically start with customer buying journey. Do you understand what that looks like on paper? Have you actually diagrammed it? Have you talked through it and looked at the go-to-market processes that then adhere to that customer buying journey or set of processes, right? Depending if you've got a different mid-market motion, an enterprise motion, an SMB motion. Are you going channel? Are you going partner? Are you going community? Are you event-led, inbound, outbound, right? So all of that needs to be sliced and diced and understood. And then once you have all of those go-to-market requirements, you can say, this piece of technology is going to be a better fit with these additional add-ons for MAP or SEP or CPQ or pick your acronym, right? But you have to start at the beginning because otherwise you're just trying to put rules and automations around something that's not been proven, right? And I think we talked about this when we did our prep call. We were talking about RevOps is really like hypothesis and test. You have to have a hypothesis. You pressure test it. It's why experimentation is so important, but you never quite get there because it's consistently a moving target because the customer behavior is constantly changing.
So you always first start with the buyer journey mapping, you call that?
Yeah, either do they have it or do they not, right? If they don't, we have to start earlier. If they've got something, now we have things to work off of and we can have a conversation that's maybe at stage 3 instead of stage 0.
So you kind of have your sequence of things that need to be in place so that they're ultimately successful if and when they implement RevOps or a CRM or whatever comes next.
Exactly. And there's always like low-hanging fruit that you can knock off in the beginning, really simple things. Some data deduping, adjusting rules and permission sets, making so that not everyone's an admin, checking the API integrations, right? Those are all things that can be done fairly quickly without having to get the full context of what's going on in the organization. Sort of like, are your pipes leaking? And then you go back through and try to optimize, retrofit, whatever the situation may call for.
And might that involve making some changes to things other than the technology that's in place? Like, do you ever make suggestions to companies for roles that need filling or like a restructuring of any teams?
Yeah, sometimes it's, hey, you've got an SDR team. You really don't need SDRs based off of your motion. Those people should probably be repurposed into customer success in some way, shape, or form, right? Let them learn the business there. Other times it's you really need a product marketing manager to get in here to help walk through the voice of the customer and make sure that you're getting your positioning and your messaging correct. If you need help with ICP, maybe you really need a new sales leader to come in the door or a consultant to go and do that. Those are things that'll happen there. A lot of the things that'll happen outside of the technology is really enablement. You can have a fantastic process, and you could have technology that's already meeting that need. But unless you're actually using the tech, what good is it?
You're typically come in when the tech stack is already set up. And even though you might go back and help them sort of tweak things, you're really coming at it from a RevOps perspective.
The tech stack's probably set up, let's call it anywhere from 60 to 80%, right? Things are there, but they're not being used all the way, right? They're not getting all the value out of the things that they've already paid for. So how do you unlock that?
Yeah.
Well, is there ever a situation where you're like truly educating them on, okay, you're at 60% or 80%, but RevOps looks like 100% alignment between these teams and these stakeholders. So like, here's what you need to do to get there.
Yeah. I mean, that comes with like executive coaching and or like we call it executive steering committees, where we're sitting down with the executives on the team saying, this is what we're seeing. This is what we think needs to happen from a strategy perspective. Why don't we all hash this out? You sort of become like a marriage counselor.
Okay.
Between sales and marketing sometimes, or like between finance and operations. But those things are necessary. And sometimes it's really helpful for folks to have a third party that's able to be objective to have that conversation.
When you sort of partner with the company through your sort of RevOps services, what do you think is the sort of long-term goal of a typical client? Do they intend to then keep you as their partner forever, or is there kind of a length of time of 2 years, 3 years? You mentioned that you recently signed a 4-year contract. So that's essentially how you do it. You kind of scope it based on the reality.
It really depends, right? That customer that just signed a 4-year contract will, at the end of that term, be with us for 8 years, I think.
So it's a renewal contract.
Yeah, which has been great. In the average run of things, I'd say probably 2.5 years. And with the way our engagements are designed, they change over time, right? Sometimes it's far more tactical. Other times it's far more technical. And sometimes it's strategic. And again, that ebbs and flows with the needs of the business. So it does change. When people are in wartime and you're cutting jobs and you just need a steady hand to make sure that things aren't going off track, that tends to be a place where people hold on to us. In other cases, right, when things are going really well, there may be an opportunity for them to bring somebody in-house and take some of that tactical stuff away from our team, and we can still stay on in that strategy role, right? So
yeah,
it really depends. In other cases, they don't want to make the hire at all. And they're like, no, you will do this for us for the foreseeable future, right? We don't have any plans of getting rid of you guys. So
yeah. I was asking that just to see if it's different from how we would do it, but it sounds very similar. So we're very fluid, and depending on how, what decisions they make along the way, we might work with a client for 3 years, or we might work with a client for 8 years, to your point. I'm also trying to get an understanding of like the difference between RevOps as a service versus a lot of us are providing RevOps consulting, which again can be technical, tactical, and strategic. So maybe it might just be like a naming difference, I guess.
perhaps.
So I'm really curious, though, just to know for sure if there's something else within, RevOps as a service that is maybe different to a consulting relationship.
I think for us specifically, like the trademarked RevOps-as-a-Service moniker is that it's meant to be all encompassing, right? It's not just sales, marketing, CS, right? We're taking a look at finance. We're taking a look at strategy. We'll help out when it comes to things like recruiting and hiring. We'll do things like board decks, right? So it gets pretty deep depending on the need of the company.
Okay. That's cool.
If you really want to push the entire function to us, we will do the entire function. Now, there was a Series C company we were working with for quite some time there, where in the course of our engagement, the VP of RevOps left, CMO left, system architect left, system administrator left. We took on all of those roles minus the CMO, and we were running day-to-day deal desk, like everything. It's definitely within the wheelhouse.
Wow.
Awesome.
I know it's a lot.
I'm just like trying to think like how you ramp up for something like that, even let alone, the client who maybe they do ideally want to have RevOps in-house like one day and ramp up to that. But how do you ramp up when the needs of the client change so drastically?
We have a fairly comprehensive ingestion process, both quantitative and qualitative. And we use that to understand what's going on in the business, looking at the data. And then we do a ton of user interviews, right? That gives us a pretty good feeling of what's going on.
Okay.
That process can be really fast. I think the quickest we've probably done that is like 10 days, but you're talking like 80 hours over 10 days, right? Or we can take like 6 to 8 weeks to get that done and really have a little bit more time to be comprehensive and then put together a project plan based off of that. Think of like your typical big four tech people processes, insights and analytics like audit. Except in most cases, we're not putting the audit together. We're just giving you the outpouring of what that audit would be.
Cool. So maybe this is a good time to kind of segue into the question of, so depending on the size of the organization and assuming that they have 60 to 80% of their tech stack figured out, at least for now, because as you already alluded to, and as we know well too, I mean, these things are changing literally daily.
Yeah.
So when you go in with a client, because you work with clients who use Salesforce, you have clients who are on HubSpot, what are the criteria that would help folks decide whether HubSpot is a better fit for the CRM component or Salesforce?
And there's a lot of complexity there. What's the size of the business? How complex are their deals? How do they structure their paperwork process? Are they in a regulated space where you have to have like FINRA, SEC, like HIPAA compliance?
That seems to come up pretty frequently, the regulatory piece.
That's all important to think about from a consideration. What are their goals? Where are they trying to get to? How big is the company? What else is in the stack today? Like, does it make sense to pull one out for the other? Ultimately, like, change management's a huge part of it. You can build a really awesome car, but if it's not going to meet your needs, because I've got a family of 6 and I need a minivan, and you built me like the coolest new version of an Aston Martin, it's never going to be a fit.
Do you have any experience with building a vehicle that maybe wasn't the right fit for the organization and then having to go back and make some adjustments?
I wouldn't say not the right fit, but maybe certain cases where communication could have been better, where perhaps someone built a Maybach when all that was really required was like the entry level Mercedes.
Okay.
One of those kind of situations where it's like all the bells and whistles weren't quite required, but the architect's like, oh, got to have it this way.
We can do this. We can do anything.
Yeah. When you got to rein that back in, right?
Right. What are some takeaways that you guys got from that experience that you'll realize to pump the brakes in the future when it starts to head that direction?
Tighter PM, tighter project management.
Okay.
I think that really helps rein a lot of that back in.
Those already make a lot of sense. So then why do you think some businesses that from the outside or on the surface look like they're essentially the same, but one is just scaling much more effectively than the other?
It's the people and the consistency. There's an Elon quote I'm going to butcher, but essentially, like, if he works 80 hours a week, he's going to end up in 6 months where his competitor is going to be in a year. Seeing that many repetitions of something over and over and over again gives you perspective of what's going on in the marketplace. Also lets you take a smaller data sample over a shorter period of time, a larger data sample over a shorter period of time to make better decisions that aren't just gut feels, but there is something there to it, even if it's anecdotal. And I think something that those organizations that are doing well that the others could learn from is really driving, again, it comes down to enablement, usually at the first line manager level, figuring out how to motivate people intrinsically, whether that's in sales and marketing and operations, like figuring out how to make people tick. Horowitz does a really good job talking about this in The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Mm-hmm.
When he's trying to motivate his team, like, let's go, we got to get to this next push. And you have to figure out how to do that both at the C-suite level, but throughout the organization as that message cascades down. I think the companies that are doing well are the ones that do that best.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it always comes back to the people, process, data, and technology. If you don't get the people part right, and the example you gave was if you're doing 80 hours instead of 40 hours, that's part of the people component, then you're probably going to have an advantage, at least for the first 6 months. Hopefully people don't burn out by that point.
Yeah, I'm not saying everyone's got to work 80 hours a week. That's probably unrealistic, right? But I don't know. I think startups tend to attract people who are workaholics and want to build something. And I don't know, maybe there's a certain masochist like behavior that lives there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've been very active in the Pavilion community. You've been a leader in that community. I believe Carabiner Group is very bought into the value of Pavilion. I met Kathleen Booth 9 years ago, probably, who I know she's the SVP of marketing and growth there. So for the folks listening or watching who aren't familiar with Pavilion, how would you say Pavilion and RevOps, kind of what the relationship between Pavilion and RevOps?
So whereas RevOps is something that I typically think of as like an operator thing, right? A function where you need people who understand how to run a business, like lots of generalists, a handful of specialists, but it's really understanding the underlying metrics of how a company runs and helping those things continue to move, right? RevOps is the mechanics. If RevOps is the mechanics, Pavilion provides education for the people who are supposed to be the architects, the C-suite folks who are meant to actually bring those things into fruition and to oversee that. So the ability to have a network of peers who you can workshop with, spitball with, figure those things out. Because if I'm trying to build that Aston Martin, right, I want to talk to somebody who understands wind deflection and how suspension controls work and all the things that I might not know about, right? Because I'm an engine guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, the power of Pavilion, the ability to get access to a marketplace of ideas globally, folks who've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and then the level of education that they bring to through like revenue growth architecture, CRO school, enterprise CRO school, CMO school. Shoot, I went to probably the best in-person event I've been to. When we talked last Thursday, I went to an Insight Partners event that Pavilion hosted Thursday night. It was 20 CROs in a room with Pablo from Insight, Kevin from Clearhaven, and Zeke from Radiant Capital. And one of the best events I've been to. Just the amount of knowledge they shared about how you as a C-suite individual should be interacting with both the board and the operating team at the investing company is like, wow, you don't get that anywhere else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Clearly, Pavilion's doing a lot of really cool stuff to help folks grow in their careers. And there's a very close connection to the whole RevOps community there. It's almost like we're seeing these circles of, so you have RevOps, then you have Pavilion, and you have CRM, and they're all kind of somehow connected. And it'd be kind of cool to have a visual of like what it is, where the crossover is.
I do love some Venn diagrams.
Exactly. Yeah, let's do another Venn diagram to see what the crossover is. And then, because I think it's really, I mean, again, just for me, just curiosity, like where do these things overlap? And because that always gives you clues in how to be better in each of those areas.
Is there anything you would encourage our listeners and or viewers to stop doing with regard to their RevOps practice?
Stop trying to automate processes before you've actually worked them out manually, right? Take the time to do it in a spreadsheet, to do it in a Word doc, like set up the regular cadence, right? Meet weekly, bi-weekly, whatever that looks like, talk through the thing, track it, figure out if this is something that actually needs to be automated. Is it worth the investment? If so, then evaluate appropriately and then go forward with it. Don't just buy stuff for the sake of buying stuff. And I guess like in 2021, 2022, that message was probably a little bit more important because now it's being forced on most people by their finance teams. But you'll make your life a lot easier if you're trying to go get an investment, whether it's in technology or additional headcount or whatever that thing might be, by taking the time to get at least a subset of data, do some experimentation, and then say, hey, based off of this, I believe this could happen. Is that worth the $10,000, $20,000 in spend that I'm asking for, right? And then do that incrementally.
Do you have a recommendation of what people should start doing with regards to RevOps or their CRM?
Yeah, write things down. A lot of companies have really good people working there that want to be successful, that want to do the things that they're being asked to do well, but they're not given a concrete path forward. And the people sort of like hold the keys to those gates. haven't taken the time to necessarily memorialize processes, concepts, ICP persona, things like that into paper. So take the time to do that. Another great way to continually get the message across is I'm a huge fan of Loom videos working asynchronously. I think it's a huge time saver, and yeah, just do more of it.
What's a use case for that? I'm not familiar with a Loom video.
Great use case, and you guys will appreciate this. You're going through, instead of doing the one-on-one user interviews, you send them a bunch of questions ahead of time, and they record themselves answering those questions. So now you don't have to take up each other's time to figure that out. I can listen to it and start building.
Yeah, Amy, it's what we talked about on Thursday. We just didn't
call it Loom.
I guess we didn't say we're going to use Loom to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Loom, Vidyard, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping you were going to have some different answers to what we have, because it's unfortunately it's all the same stuff. It is. I mean, a lot of it is based on, first of all, the size of the business, and we typically do that based on the number of people versus revenue. I know you also didn't specify, but we call it company size, but we specifically talk about it, in number of people, and I'm sure you probably do the same. And then even though the sort of regulatory piece of it is going to change, as for these sort of smaller mid-sized companies, so up to 2,000 people, we believe it's just a matter of time before HubSpot comes out with a solution for that. But for right now, if we're in a conversation with a company who is 5,000 people or even 2,000 people, but they have a heavy need for compliance and regulation, even if they really want to use a component of HubSpot, we would recommend that they use Salesforce for the CRM component where the data needs to be protected. So yeah, I guess the answer is very much the same, which I think is still probably valuable for anyone who's asking that question right now. Anyone who's evaluating right now, if they have a contract coming to an end with Salesforce, for example, they're typically doing the stuff that you and we do all the time, which is help our clients assess their tech stack, assess how much bloat there is, are people using it, which is the ultimate measurement of the value of a CRM as part of your RevOps solution. If usage is going to increase by switching to a new system, then probably something that they should seriously consider. If usage is already high, then you probably don't want to touch it, because that's the ultimate value of a CRM from a tech perspective is usage, right? And the way you get there, you already touched on this earlier, how do you get to adoption and usage? It's through change management, training, all the kinds of things that people really need to use a tool successfully to automate all these sort of menial tasks so they can spend their time on more productive and more high value work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We just used HubSpot and Salesforce as an example. What's really interesting, what's happened in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, is that Dynamics is a far bigger player that we're running into now, as people are, again, considering the same sort of thing. If they're already on Microsoft Dynamics and their usage isn't great, or we just had a situation like this in December, 2,000 person company here in Minnesota, they'd realized that none of their sales team were actually even using the product. So they did what we just talked about, which any sort of leadership would do, is reassess, do we need a new CRM? And ultimately, they decided that Microsoft made the most sense because it's already so integrated into their business, from email all the way through to ERP, if it's a manufacturing company.
What are they using? Great Plains?
Originally, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I got one right now. I've got a buddy of mine. He works for a company in the Heartland, and Dynamics CRM, Great Plains for ERP. But they just found out the version of Great Plains they're on is going to be deprecated. Will no longer be supported within the next 12 months. Like, all right, so do we swap out a CRM? Because we definitely have to swap out an ERP.
Exactly. Yeah.
Probably a NetSuite implementation, right? Because at that scale, I think they're 200 million in business. So like, it's not insignificant kind of spend coming through there that they have to be able to track everything through. And, it's both a SaaS product and physical goods, right? Hardware. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It is. Yeah. And I guess, and this is, again, is part of what we're trying to do here is just talk about what some of these options are and what the considerations are that folks need to be thinking about if they're in that situation where they're looking at a change coming up, whether it's in the next 6 months, 12 months, because again, the sooner you get ahead of it and the sooner you start planning and figuring out what these criteria are, the more prepared you're going to be and the better decision you're going to make. And I really like what you were saying earlier about, so just forget about the shiny object, which is the technology. Let's just try and map this out on a spreadsheet, which I can't believe I just said that, but make sure that it works manually first, and then figure out how to map it to the correct technology stack. And of course, the technology component is just going to get more and more tricky with all these very point and very specific AI tools that are just, coming out every single morning.
Mm-hmm.
I was just testing something yesterday. I could just see this happening where in 3 months from now, I'm going to be going, oh, but yeah, I already have this tool, but now I want this tool, and how do I integrate them and make sure that they work together and make sure that they still work with everything else that I'm doing? You just know that that's going to be happening at a scale and at a velocity which just hasn't existed before.
Oh, we're supposed to have we were at 32,000 SaaS companies last year. We're supposed to be at 73,000 by the end of 2024. And to your point, people are using AI. They're building faster than ever. There's going to be a need for a app layer data orchestration tool that's going to be able to allow you to sync that data more effectively and more cost effectively, most importantly, than a Fivetran or Workato or something of that nature, right? You're going to have to push it in. And maybe it's through a CDW, or maybe you're doing it in a standalone system, but it's going to have to happen for the data orchestration.
Right, exactly. Which of course is the opportunity for everybody, right? So the challenge for every business is the same as the opportunity for every business. But the challenge is you have to continuously figure this out. And the opportunity is, if you do, you're going to stay ahead, which hopefully is what everyone's trying to do.
It's hard to find the time to constantly stay on top of stuff. I mean, I feel like I'm in a very fortunate place where I get the freedom from my CEO to look at 3 to 10 pieces of tech a week. That's part of just my weekly duties, because I feel like I need to stay on top of it, right, for my own edification. But it's a lot to ask for.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, that's, we obviously feel the same way that we always have to be on top of whatever technology could be making life easier for our clients. But it's really, really hard, and it's getting harder because there's just more and more to consider every day. And then by the time you've distilled that and communicated that to whether it's 1, 2, 5, or 12 different clients, to say, this is maybe something you can consider, or you should consider, then the next thing's already out, and it's like you're always like, you feel like you might, then you get caught in the trap of, well, let's just wait, let's wait 3 months, but a lot can happen in 3 months. So
that's why experimentation is so important, right? You take a subset of it and try something out, and if it works, okay, then you can open it up to a larger experiment.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOps-champions.com.